The idea is to drive thought leadership through these activities. And today we are doing this town hall. We've been doing this across India, so Mumbai, Delhi, and now Bangalore. It's a very focused activity with senior people, and the idea is to bring in thought leadership around what's next for marketeers and product heads. To start off today, we do the first panel. We'll sit here in the panel. This session is around growth vaccine for 2021, and I would like to invite the panelists for today. It's Manikanta Yadavli, VP Growth Trail, Vanda Ferrao, Head of Marketing Fresh to Home, Edwin Den, Head of Marketing Branch, Abhishek Gupta, CEO, Turbotic. Abhishek, can we start? We'll have the, we'll have the panelists.
Thanks everyone for joining today morning. A quick intro, I'm Abhishek, I'm CEO and board member of Turbotic in India. Before this I was partner with KPMG, and in my current role I also happen to be a partner with V Founder Circle, which is early stage VC fund. We funded 30 startups in last 1 year, which is the highest by any VC funds in the country. With me, I have Santosh, want to join us. We have Mani, who's about to join us, and then we have Vanda. You want to quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Santosh. I'm the CTO co-founder of Blowhorn. Blowhorn is an intracity same-day delivery logistics company. It's a tech-first. Our vision is to be in an asset-light fashion, make sure the same-day delivery happens across India. And I had the product and the engineering team there, and I'm just substituting for my marketing.
Excellent. We have Vanda.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Vanda. I head marketing, CS and innovation at Fresh to Home. Fresh to Home is India's top meat and seafood online brand. We have presence in India also and growing and expanding in the Middle East. Happy to be on this panel and share my insights.
Perfect. Without much ado, the common objective of this group is to understand what's happening, what are the changes, how it's going to impact, how are we dealing with those changes on day-to-day basis, especially in B2C, which is a lot more dynamic, and we have experts from industry. I'd like to play as much as unbiased, but I have lots of startups who I am mentoring, and they are adopting a couple of very interesting strategies, which up to a point remains a secret. And then when you realize that it's no more a secret, then it becomes a book or a best practices. So we'll try to see if we can bring some of those secrets out today and in the discussion, because what has happened last 2 years is not it is not only unprecedented, but it is a paradigm shift. It's a big shift in consumer behavior, their choice, the segments, the channels which they have been using. And we all have seen that. So this behavior change has led to a very difficult change for all of us. So acquisition strategy, for you guys, for you, it has changed, and it has changed while you were in the early stage of your startup, right? So Vanda, if I'll start with you, these behavior change, how it has impacted the acquisition strategy for you.
Thanks. Yes, I would say the last 2 years, if our life could be, ADBC, it could be pre-COVID and during COVID. I think I can attribute these 2 years to what has happened during COVID. A lot has changed. So our business is all about, building a habit or rather breaking a habit. In the meat and seafood industry, it's all about 98% is unorganized. It's all about nudging consumers to buy online. And I think there's been a tectonic shift during COVID. I could attribute four trends which have actually happened, which have changed my strategy. The first is, if it's habit change, awareness is very important. What we've seen organically, people actually have come to buy meat and seafood online. So we do a lot of awareness to tell people about our product, our offering. But what COVID has done is, because your regular source is actually closed, you are seeking options. So that has impacted us really positively. So whichever brand has built on awareness prior, right, has reaped the benefits. So for us, awareness building is very, very important, and we've continued doing it to be able to accrue this benefit. The second thing is that when your meat and seafood regular place, you are apprehensive about the product, about being crowded, about, not being there. So in your acquisition strategy, if you actually specifically mention benefits, then you actually stand to gain. The third thing is about, new categories. I'm in the meat and seafood industry, but selling raw has always been very, very difficult. It's price discoverable. It's not very differentiated. But through a portfolio strategy, right, when we have expanded with a lot of value-added products, right, we've been able to reach out to far more newer audiences, because during COVID, right, consumption patterns have changed. In-house dining, in-house consumption has increased. So we have this new range of products like momos, ready to cook, nuggets, etc., that has really done well, and it's easy to acquire people that way. So this has led to better growth. The fourth and most interesting thing is, content consumption has changed. If I did typical, through my regular video viewing channels, now I also have to do OTT. TV also has been very, very prominent, right? So all these things have ensured that my top of the funnel grows, and it's easy to acquire people. So this multi-pronged strategy has actually changed, because COVID has induced a lot of behavioral changes in consumers.
And while, Vanda has been trying to make sure that their customer get it on same day, after awareness and after benefits, the role comes to you, right? How have you managed to acquire? I'm sure it must have added a lot of benefits to you, because in the business which you are in.
Yeah. Am I on?
You are audible otherwise.
I think what COVID did on the supply side of things was drastic, right? All the warehouses were sort of shut down. The supply people weren't available, right? So there were a number of challenges, and our normal channels, how we reach out to the delivery partners or the fleet owners, right? It sort of became a vacuum all of a sudden. And that is where I think some of the metrics which we used to use to sort of drive the growth on the supply front changed, right? We saw the engagement was more of an influencer. So we created something known as the Friends of Blowhorn, right? So they were other drivers or fleet owners who were championing the cause and then sort of taking it to the community and then getting it. And during COVID also, what has happened is the digitization has increased even in the supply community as well as on the demand side. So there are newer ways of looking at it. Gone are the traditional event-based customer experience journey. All of that is gone now. So there are some interesting models in place. The content design discovery, how you put marketing typically is no longer the way, right? You want to put out an artifact, something like a mixed reality or some sort of an AR. Build something which engages the user right from the beginning, right? And new websites, new things are getting built out on that front, right? You don't want to create impressions, increase CTRs. That no longer is the game. Right? You immerse them inside a particular sort of thing. So we do something known as a gamification on the app side when he gets onboarded, and we take some data and give him some insights. And if those heuristics are sort of matching well with the user acquisition will be there, and your lifetime of the customer will be more and all of that.
But that brings me to a very important point, Santosh, while you said, the AX, AR part, right? Where you use immersive tech to engage with the customer. But the touch points are too many today, right? If you look at, there is Insta, there is WhatsApp, there is Facebook, traditional, and then your buyers are also shifting, right? They are moving from one platform to other platform. So with so many channels and so many touch points, how do you maintain the same experience? Or if you have to maintain the same experience, how are you managing that?
So we do this use case driven. So typically, let's say if you have a warehousing, which is probably needed in same day logistics, then you try to take the user perspective and then sort to build some use case around it, right? And then try and experiment that on the demand side, whether it works or does not work, right? So you will have to be very careful on the users you already have and that are part of your growth, and then sort of experiment everything on that. And if that works there, be it on the transportation aspect, on the warehousing, or on the fulfillment journey. If you do this right and then take it to the demand on the next. It is still evolving. You can see a lot of websites being done on the AR these days. That's become a trend now. And in the next 1 year, I think even the kind of readiness on the mobile 60 and all of that will start getting better. Right. So there are some glass patents which are on, variables are going to get increased on the warehousing front, right? So there is sufficient use cases to sort of experiment on the mixed reality, which is a word we like to live in, whether we like it or not. Right?
You will try to capitalize, but I think for you also it will be equally important because you have your customer segment which is evolving, which is new, and again you might find them on Insta, you might find them somewhere else, right? How do you maintain this consistency, or do you need to maintain that consistency?
I think consistency is key. In this world, when there are so many variables, you have to find method to madness. And I think those were the days it was silos. We are trying to actually ensure that we identify people across as one string or one person across the entire journey. So we see it as together. As you said, there are so many channels, right? So I would say that gone were the days it was, digital marketing, retention, brand marketing, etc. Now there is a consumer who's interacting with you across all this. You have made man-made things and people have worked in silos as such, right? When you said channels, for example, Instagram, Facebook, there's new and repeat. It's the same consumer who doesn't know my brand or who's transacted with me once. So what we try to do is cohesively try to integrate everything. And I think with automation and the platforms we use right now, it's very, very helpful in seeing all this as one person of how he interacts through different touch points. It's not like a sci-fi journey right now where I can see, but we are trying to get there. So gone were the days, when everything is manual. I see people who've transacted once, this cohort, etc. Now with the platforms we have, we try to integrate it as seamlessly as possible. And teams come together to work effectively that, this is Vanda, she has bought, say, yesterday, but she saw a Facebook ad, 5 days back. She saw a TV ad 1 month back. So what is her journey? What she has bought, what she has the propensity to buy. So you try to understand the customer blueprint, right, of who's interacting with you. And then you actually serve content, you serve your category, and you ensure that the customer experience is stellar, and that will also result in, you getting better revenues from the business side. So I think we should stop looking at it as silos. But, thanks to automation and different platforms which are there, this enables a far more seamless journey for us, and makes our life simpler also.
Like I understand the categories for you, but is category also a play for you in keeping customer segment or experience consistent?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I think logistics is like building a network, right? So I take the analogy of internet, right? Back in the days, we used to have a 2G internet at places. You will have closed things and then this one. So logistics also is similar. Tier 1 cities initially saw like 15 minutes, now insane, 13 minutes delivery is happening, right? So that's the trend, hyperlocal that's headed. But on the same side, tier 2 cities were initially happy with the 2-day, 3-day thing. Now they need at least next day or a same day kind of thing. So there are different user segments and they get influenced differently. So Vanda took an example where I think she mentioned social media, and you look at it and then you market it there and you can directly buy it. So you short circuit the whole e-commerce process directly through social commerce, right?
Yeah.
So that's one way to look at it. So there might be different strategies for different user segments. It's just how we sort of classify them, whether it is businesses, whether it is individuals, whether it is small and medium businesses, right? And what kind of an industry they are. Are you in auto parts? So can you spare 2 days, right? Are you a meat, right? You get it fresh, right? If it's fish, then it has to be sort of packaged. It's cold chain, right? So different aspects have to be looked into and then sort of catered to.
Interesting. So we have money. Money. We all are after money, and money comes late. The working capital become difficult. So jokes apart, money. If you want to quickly introduce yourself, also give a quick view on what have you seen a shift in last 2 years in consumer behavior in your industry.
Cool. So hi, this is Mani. I work with Trell. I take care of Trell. I'm the VP growth for Trell. I've been with Trell from the past 3 years. I manage growth and monetization for the platform as of now. From the last 2 years for Trell, it was an amazing journey actually. So especially with the content space, there is a I have seen really great shifts, and I'm not sure about other industries, but pandemic has really helped us in terms of growing probably 5 folds or 10 folds, that's what I call it, because the internet penetration started increasing really well, and then we have seen huge amount of user shift from tier 2 and tier 3, as we being a vernacular localized platform, being a social commerce platform, we have seen immense growth, and in the last say 1.5 years, I think our user growth has been really amazing, and especially when it comes to tier 2 and tier 3 hyperlocal markets, we can see that the user consumption and content patterns has really helped us in terms of understanding what kind of content user would love to consume, and what exactly is their lifestyle choices that actually has helped them in terms of making a shift. Okay, and then we have seen a really good jump in terms of commerce very soon, and we have launched commerce probably 6-7 months back, and we're doing amazing in terms of commerce. When it comes to commerce, where hyperlocal content commerce, where user exactly understands what's the need, and we being a creator platform, helping giving a place for creators to come onto the platform and create content in vernacular languages, which can actually reach to multiple hyperlocal audience, and making them take good decisions in terms of choosing a particular product or say brand, or helping D2C brands grow onto the platform. It was really amazing. And from the past 1.5-2 years, basically from the last 1 year, I think we have grown probably 10x than whatever we are. Actually, the whole company was built actually in the last 1.5 years. That's all I say.
So what has changed for you?
The shift in content consumption, the shift in say the way how content is consumed, the way how people actually look at purchasing products, what are their intakes in terms of finally making a purchase decision actually. So if you see, earlier it was all tier 2, tier 1 and mostly metros, and now we see our 55 to 60% of the orders coming from our tier 2 and tier 3 villages actually, tier 2 and tier 3 markets. And there is a lot of shift in D2C brands, so it's not only the what you call the big brands that are playing, but if you see with the real value of content, if you're able to clearly communicate to the user what exactly is the value add that is going to come from a particular product with say right creators, or giving it right information to the user. There are tier 2 and tier 3 markets, or tier 2 and tier 3 consumption also. Actually, people started taking it very well, and then I have seen a really good shift in terms of our number of orders that are coming onto the platform on a daily basis. We right now drive around 60% of the orders coming from tier 2 and tier 3 markets, but earlier it was completely 70 to 80% of the orders coming from tier 1 or metros. That's all I call. And moreover, the consumer also started becoming aware of how exactly he wants to get it. And earlier it was like pointed out, right? Like it was earlier 2 days, 3 days, one week delivery. But right now, if you're able to give him that experience, give him a best customer experience where you're able to get the product delivered to him by say 1 day or say 2 days or within hours, it's really, and the customer sticks to you, and he definitely, they really value the platform, and the loyalty of the customer stays with you, and it really helped. And because of the internet penetration, whatever we have, I think Jio has helped us really well in terms of getting those people who has an intent to buy and who has an intent to actually consume content online, bringing them onto the internet space, right? Opening up an avenue for them to consume content and make good lifestyle choices. I think that has actually really well, and that shift and the transformation, whatever I've seen, that was really amazing.
Excellent. So, when coming to you, are you able to target Bharat, or you are still in selling in India?
It is India and it is Bharat also. I started with India, but now Bharat also has become big. So I think I completely concur with Mani that Bharat actually is growing for me. So if you see tier 2, tier 3, right, there is so much of awareness and there is demand, and people want to really adapt to newer things, right? And meat and seafood is very basic. It's something we eat every day, every second day. But there's a growing demand for, packaged meat and seafood, clean meat and seafood. So Madurai, Trichy, Coimbatore, Nasik, right? If you call it Bharat, I mean, it's still India or Bharat, but the amount of, I mean, when I see search, right? So we also see where we have to go next, right? Because growth is important for us, where you acquire consumers. So it is footprint expansion and also usage, consumption, etc. Footprint expansion, all these markets actually, we see a lot of, search volumes coming from the organic search. So then we actually chart our footprint. Madurai, Trichy, Nasik, we are really, really surprised of how they actually behave like urban India, because there is also the need for convenience, the need to upgrade, the need for, hygiene. So these are actually category drivers. So we were always, we believed that it was an urban phenomena, but I think especially with COVID coming in, right? You know how hectic, chaotic our lives have been. You gave the example of America, of how it actually changed, right? I think time is a constraint everywhere. So I think we are selling to Bharat also. We've got a lot of acceptance there. And I think it's really heady days because growth is coming from different quarters and different geographies. So good to be in this space.
Santosh, are you connecting with Bharat, all these guys, or?
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, there are a lot of short shelf life brands that try to sort of look into what can be done, what can be innovative in terms of how you deliver it, and how do you package it and then convey to the customer that it is probably cheaper than what you go to the local butcher shop in this case, right, or to the local vegetable mandi and buy. You get it to your home fresh, clean, and all of that. I think that sort of helps. And we are always trying to understand the supply chain problem, because that's where I think we like to place ourselves and figure out like how the logistics is happening and maybe can we make it better, right?
So the two part of it now. Now, if all three of you if you get an X amount of marketing budget, while I understand, this trend of and the attraction of Bharat because it's a big market. We are working with a couple of startups. Many of you know about HESA. HESA is into 3 states and they got lots of funding because they have a network of HESATI. There are two parts of my marketing budget which I have to look at. One is the acquisition. Second is the lifetime value, which I need to increase. How will you try to strategize on acquisition versus, you were talking about selling to the same guy more SKUs or increasing the lifetime value of the customer? How will you strategize your budget between these two?
So if you take in the case of Trell, right, it's a little different ball game altogether. So Trell is, we acquire customer for content. So we basically acquire customer for watching content on our platform. So there are creators who come onto the platform to create valuable content, and people come onto the platform to consume that content. And making sure that relevant content is delivered to them without search. It's not, the intent is not search, right? So giving them relevant content at every stage of their life on a day in and day out basis is what is the value that we basically create for a consumer. And from there, we basically ask them or we link our commerce or we help them in terms of making a lifestyle choice. Okay, so our budgets are divided into two different pieces, as you are saying, right? So one is for the acquisition part. When you say the acquisition is mostly for the people who basically wanted to come onto the platform and then watch really valuable content and make sure that they are getting good content pieces through our AI, ML, whatever algorithm we have, and then we make sure that the time spent on the platform is actually increasing because of people coming onto the platform. And then they keep watching more and more content, which basically is not content that's basically into entertainment, or we are a lifestyle choice platform where we give content which basically helps them to make some lifestyle decision at some point of time in their life. It might be related to the food, their habits, or it might be related to the fashion, beauty, any of it, right? And then we make sure that they're getting relevant content that actually helps them in terms of, say, taking a good decision about that, and then we basically move it for retention. So the more time they spend onto the platform, the more retention that we get, and as in when we keep getting more retention, I think we basically ask them to basically move to the next funnel. That's how it's broken as of now. And if you ask me the budget split or how exactly our budgets are divided, we focus on basically bringing the new user onto the platform with a good experience, with a very good experience, and making sure that we understand the customer at right segment, right audience, which is very hyper local and hyper targeted, and we make sure that we are giving relevant content to him and post that with our CRM and say with our in-house nurturing channels, whatever we have, we keep making sure that the customer. So mostly it's the acquisition part, and the rest, the product and say our customer experience and say our logistics plays the most of the effort in terms of making sure that our LTV is increasing, and then we keep repeating that. That's simple.
And for you, it's a new segment, right, which is an organized one. And for the new segment which you have created altogether, I'm assuming right now you will have a lot more focus on acquisition part right for now. Or is there a segment which is matured enough for you to focus on LTV?
So this is an emerging business. We are learning every day. So the truth of the category is, when we do surveys and studies, there are 10 meat, seafood, and poultry purchasing occasions in a month. So on an average, my regular customer gives me around 2. So I think if you see that number, both acquisition and retention is very important, because in retention you are saying from 2, how do I move him to make 10? So he's buying chicken, meat, eggs, etc. He's buying from Fresh to Home for, say, he really likes the chicken, but he still goes and buys, mutton from somewhere else, etc. How do I, one is retain him so he keeps on purchasing, and also open up new categories for him so that I accrue better revenue from him. So retention and making him transact more is very, very important. And that is that's a category play, awareness play. So you keep on doing new things to make him aware. So we can't, I think, silo it. That being said, we have, say, an X amount of people in our base, which is our captive audience. They've at least transacted once with us, so they know the brand. So it's always a base effect, right? Every marketer says the bigger the base, the bigger the captive audience I have. And we know it's a leaky bucket, right? We know how retention numbers do. So I have to always fill the funnel with new users. So acquisitions is very, very important for me. I have to keep on filling it. And with respect to acquisition, there are newer things you do, because there are different purchase triggers and barriers. How do you communicate to get people onto your platform? And whatever you do also helps the retained base also, because that's also awareness, that's salience building, he gets reminders. So I think both are equally important for growth. And we do, specific strategies to ensure there's a steady inflow in both sets of the bucket.
So expanding the base and at the same time maintaining that leakage, compensating that with a larger is what you have been trying to do. Santosh?
Yeah, from a supply side, I think retention is a very important metric, right? Because we can add new fleets, we can add new vendors, we can add new customers also, because it's a very low barrier to entry, right? So anybody can come. So the key for us is mostly in retaining the users on the platform. If somebody who is using it for making one hyperlocal delivery, against somebody sitting on it for 8 hours on the platform and driving and then doing all of that. And we'll have to be, unlike the consumer space where you can actually nudge the user to do certain things, this is driving, it's very serious. Right. So you cannot actually do a lot of fun there, right? I mean, you'll have to be like, make sure we take a lot of help from platforms which do vernacular things, right? Because that helps them understand, talk, and do all of that, right? In their native language. So that's how we try to engage them, and most of the budget is focused towards retention, where we want to sort of make sure the platform drivers stay there. Stickiness is there, and it eventually leads into some consumer attention also, and then that takes care of it.
So, while this, from your perspective and his perspective, this is a little different. Maybe perhaps for Fresh to Home, you will spend a lot more on acquisition because new category, new segment, new market you're acquiring. This has been there for a while. But how have channels impacted your strategy in last 2 years?
A lot, because I'll take it from a technical side. The amount of time we used to take to integrate with a new brand used to be close to 4 days, 5 days, because of the technical team's integration. Now, founders, without having to do any coding, have very no-code platforms where they can directly integrate. And onboarding customers in logistics is a nightmare, because everybody runs operations differently. You cannot have one single platform that will meet all the customer needs. So that is where I think we have been focusing, stressing, using as much as omni-channel integrations that are available. So people who do order managements and things like that, we sort of go and integrate with them, see if the use case is valid for Blow-on. It is same-day delivery use case. Then we try to link with them and then get the orders there. And we do a back thing also, like for example, if you're a Shopify, you're getting some information and you don't want to sort of get to another platform, manage all of those things, right? As a seller, then you can probably get the information same on your platform itself to do all of that. So I think that's where we engage. During the COVID, API integrations have increased 80% at Blowhor. Just a number. I think it's going crazy.
I think supply chain has been a highlight of the COVID digital transformation agendas, and I'm sure channel must have also changed your strategy.
So, regarding channels that has worked for us, so really found there is this myth, right, where influencer marketing, where people, brands are not very interested or convenient in terms of proving ROIs from influencer marketing and how exactly to evaluate and all. But when it comes to Trell, or the way how we have explored it, actually really have worked really well for us. So when you started engaging with smaller influencers, and then when you nurtured them to get right content out there, and then make sure that it is given out to the right consumer at the same point, I think that really helped them in terms of picking our brand, and at the same time getting us reach to the right audience at the same time. And we have actually proved ROI on influencer marketing. We really feel that influencer marketing is going to be really big. Creators in India are going to be really big, and at the same time giving them that space. So that's one channel that I say that has actually changed the notation of how exactly that channel has to be consumed, because there are barriers where when you pick influencer marketing, you only think that it is only a platform where it gives you branding, and people don't consider it as an ROI channel. But if you evaluate, or if you start using it in a right way, I think that actually can give you really good brand value, which actually can eventually help your all other marketing platform channels, like say performance marketing or any other marketing platforms. And the other thing, I think the next piece that has actually helped us in terms of like web and organic, because we are an app first platform, but web traffics that we have, I think now the user have this understanding in terms of conversion from web to app really well, and how exactly to transform. If you are able to guide him and nurture him very clearly, he'll be able to move to your app very clearly, and that as a channel has actually really helped us go forward.
I think those are very important for digital native
Yes,
companies to
yes.
crack the code.
Yep.
And as you rightly said, nurture them and guide them.
Yeah, yes.
is very critical, and I'm sure Vanda, for you also, this change the channel is very critical, because what we heard is influencer, right? These used to be brand ambassador. Yeah. Now, if you look at, there was a recent research where I saw India is among the top 10 countries where the influencer marketing is actually giving the good ROI. How has it been for you? I've seen many, influencer in the category in which you are playing are actually impactful.
I think it's category specific, and especially for our category, which is meat and seafood, right? building trust and credibility is very, very important. This is like an FMCG product, right? And you're very happy buying it from your local chicken shop, your local butcher. Like, he's not selling you poisonous, dirty stuff, right? And I've been buying from years. So then why do I shift online? So this is also about habit creation, where it goes deeper in terms of intrinsic behavioral change. And I think advocacy, and also it's just not awareness creation. I can't make ads. I can't do, even performance marketing, throw a coupon. He'll come to it, he'll transact and he'll go. But what about the bigger change which you want to effect, right? This is similar to, I would say, like Kellogg's, right? For so many years, they're telling us upma, poha, paratha is okay, but eat cornflakes, right? And we love that. So you're effectively going against the grain. So it takes time. It's about behavioral change. And I think in that terms, the channels which really work well are awareness creation, and therefore content for me, video for me, right? When I did my first TV campaign, it really helped, it was a start. We did 2 as yet, but it helps build that awareness, okay? A brand on TV has credibility. So you see it. And we also know in consumer behavior, you need at least 7 to 8 times to experience the brand for it to become part of your basket. That's like how sampling works. So in terms of communication, you see the ad, then you actually add influencers as a strong channel. So we have appropriated 2 genres. One is, you won't believe it, but it is actually comedians, and also cooking. Cooking because it's intrinsic. And you won't believe comedians actually do really well because they actually shape perception. So we've used these 2 genres to build the next level of, building credibility, and then making, then you supplement it also with your performance, etc. And we've seen fairly good results. So when it comes with behavioral change, you have to be always on. You have to have some credibility, and this impacts your channel. So we see organic, we see direct, even search actually improves. Everything, in sequentially it actually improves, and you acquire better.
Interesting. So I think quite a lot of secrets which I was talking earlier are out in terms of stand-up comedy, and in terms of spending a lot more acquisition. I'm open to for any questions if you guys have for the panel here. Anything which you want to ask on channels, strategy, consumer behavior change, feel free to ask. We have champions here on content, on the new category, on same-day delivery.
In terms of, hi, this is Raj. In terms of regional content, are you seeing the north-south divide, like, the south regional languages holding up really well against, the north, which is largely monolithic Hindi and Bengali and Gujarati?
It's different for every language. It's the way how you basically deliver the content to the audience, right? So, for example, let's say Hindi must be mostly should be possible for, spoken in the north everywhere. It should be a channel, or it should be a language that it can suffice each and every region of north. It's fine, but people understand Hindi and it is communicated well. But if you're able to give content, or if you're able to get content in particular specific language, now let's say in Mumbai, for example, let's say Maharashtra, Marathi is spoken really well, but Hindi consumption is fairly equal. But if you're able to give content in Marathi, I think people consume it really well, and people would love to consume content in Marathi because there are very few channels or very few say avenues that they can find that kind of content, which is digital first, right? And if you're able to give good content, actually they would love to consume in their local and local language or mother tongue, and that shift actually really is really good.
So, follow-up question, what genre of content? Is it comedy? Is it slice of life?
For us, we being a lifestyle platform, we have probably 15 to 20 categories to 25 categories that we basically have on the platform. It depends on each and every consumer. Every consumer might have affinity towards 3 to 4 categories. It might be comedy, it might be food, it might be travel, it might be, say, fashion or beauty as a piece, right? So every consumer have it differently. So if you're looking at specific say regions, we could not point out that in this particular region, this is the content that has to be consumed or that will be consumed. It differs for each and every segment of user. For me, probably it might be travel and say food, maybe I love to cook. And for some other consumer, it's totally different. So if you're able to give that right content, I think people consume it. It should be very easy. Yes. Please.
So I'll come with this meat and seafood example. So because you deal with categories which are so intrinsic to a culture, right? I believe content and the language in which you tell is gets you better conversions, better affinity. I'll give you an example. Where the way a Bengali, is so close to their hilsa, or Malayali to their mackerel, or a Punjabi to their chicken tikka, right? Or a Maharashtrian to their ravas, right? You can't have one thing fits all. So also when you're creating content, it is also the insight which is important, which you actually communicate, and also the delivery, which is the language. So we've seen incredible gains when we make content relevant to communities, because this is a very personal to me, right? Second part is, how do you go about it? Because this requires a lot of effort, resources, and you have to be bang on. But the minute you make content relevant to a consumer, right? Because you have to deliver to the consumer, the affinity is higher, and we see a lot of traction. So I think regional vernacular is the way to go. When, for example, when we launch Lucknow and we use Pankaj Bhadoria, the famous chef, and she speaks in that accent and makes the food which is relevant to a Lucknow resident, right? Obviously, it is something for me. It's a brand for me. And you see that, okay, I will buy it. So even if you see this in terms of FMCG companies, of how they use brand ambassadors, right? They'll use one for the north, one for the south, one for the east, because it has better traction. So I think customization, vernacular is the way to go if you actually want to grow.
And also, we tried a couple of things with drivers, what works. Take Rajnikant, for example. If you take Rajnikant, it works even in Karnataka, right? If you put out, language is actually no longer a barrier. They just have to see their iconic hero, and you can actually connect. You can make Amitabh Bachchan Coolie, and you can sell it in Karnataka also. It's not a barrier. Similarly, it's not really region divided. It's depending on how you make them perceive, right? What kind of actor, what kind of person you want to sort of put a shadow on. If you get that right, I think everything else is sorted.
Excellent. Any other questions? Bhavesh, how much time we have?
Okay, so I'm a little bit curious about the AR application in supply chain logistics that you guys are doing. I'm not sure about who the customer target segment is, but very curious about the AR in this specific segment.
Yeah, so I think transportation AR is, there are use cases, but not very heavy use cases. But warehousing AR is something that is there. Suppose I enter into this, room. I know there are 4 paintings, 5 vases, that kind of an information I want to have. Traditionally, these things were done through a set of automations. There were some sort of checks on top of that to make sure things happen, etc. It's very labor intensive, especially in the West, right? With AR, what it's going to happen is we will be able to make the right decisions, because so far cognitive senses keep changing as you sort of age, right? You may not be as receptive to hearing as you were, right? And this additional nudge that the mixed reality or the computer vision gives you sort of makes the labor think a lot different than how it used to be, right? So what you would definitely see as a changing trend is specialists for warehousing, right? It's no longer people who do labor, right? They're also planners. They can actually pursue, right? I see a red thing there, and I see, okay, it's diapers, which is like the fast-moving, high-velocity items. Then I can create a purchase order just on a blink of some device, right? So these things will come. We'll have to see how it plays out. It's too early, but it's not too far, right? Next year, I think you'll see most of the AR-based things coming out, right? How internet was pushed through social media. I think AR devices will be pushed to the consumers based on this.
There are a few use cases where it was used for digital twin for the tracking and tracing purpose, putting the same on the blockchain and then just making sure that it is reaching on the time, plus the impact of temperature and humidity during the transport. Those are, but again, AR is not required that much. It was just a add-on which did it. All right. Any other questions?
Hi, this is Nikhil from the CleverTap marketing team. The emergence of digital has led to a lot of data-driven marketing and advertising. But since a lot of B2C companies still focus on traditional methods like print, your TV and all of that, I was wondering how do you track the success of those activities and how do you get it justified when planning for the next year? And this is open even for the audience out there. It's applicable for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've touched on that question, which we get asked all the time.
Every day.
Every
How much
day.
you are spending?
Yeah, because it's day in and day out actually, and see, all of us have attribution tools, etc., right? And we know specifically how certain channels actually work, but then you have traditional channels like print. You do a lot of BTL. You do TV also. So how we go about it is we actually see sessions. So our mix also, we try to keep some fixed and others variable, because even in modeling, right, you can't have everything or a majority of it as variable, because pinpointing of what is the lead, it will be a challenge. So we see sessions and we see organic searches. And the third thing we actually do is whatever we are doing in terms of print, for example, right, we try to affix a coupon code and we see redemptions. So, and then we plot a percentage, because people have seen it. They may not have used that coupon code to avail the offer, but if you see, for example, say 2,000 redemptions, then you can extrapolate it like 3x, 4x, etc. in terms of views, etc. And the fourth thing is we have brand tracks. So month on month, we actually go to markets and we actually see in terms of the funnel, right? Top of mind, Tom plus Pond, total awareness, consideration, MOUP, usage, etc. How this impact, and then we actually track what are the mix changes which we have done. What are the channels we have, new channels we have used, new campaigns, and we try to get at least a trend to see if it works. And we have done experiments to see that we have not used newspapers on certain times. What is the drop in organic traffic? What is the drop in sessions? And there's more or less a correlation which we see to ensure that we keep on doing this. And it's also basis TG, right? What we see is basis a certain ethnicity and a certain age group, I have higher traction. So that TG is predisposed to actually seeing, reading newspapers, etc. So the minute I don't do that, it falls. So I have a back of the envelope kind of a method to determine that.
This would be over a larger period of time to build this correlation.
Yeah, it takes, at least I would say it takes 2 business cycles, especially in a category like ours, which is very seasonal, right? So you have festivals where people don't consume, Shravan, Navratra. So you actually see it going down. You see organic traffic also going down. So you play your strategy that you're not going to go full. Yeah. So it takes 2 business cycles to be able to see the peaks and troughs, and then you can determine your media mix.
So thanks everyone. Thanks for joining today, and thanks to all the panelists. Great insights. I must say this stand-up comedian one I'll also try now in a couple of places.
But one thing is like they do get bashed, so be very careful. So it's always a risk.
When you talk about to Bharat or to India,
I wouldn't say that, but yeah, because they also appeal to this young India, emerging India, and that's a very different India. So everybody wants to go to the millennials and to go to people. They are the biggest in the workforce, right? They have disposable income, but you have to be careful. So it's always a risk which you take. Yeah.
that's part of the game.
Yeah.
Thanks
Thank
everyone
you.
for joining today.
Thanks
you so
Abhishek,
much.
thanks Satish, thanks Vanna, and thanks Mani. Thank you for joining us for the session. So we start our next session. So our next session is around decoding the new rules of user retention for BFSI. For that, I would like to invite Rajgopal Menon, VP Marketing Vasudev, Hitaj Saini, Head of Marketing, Manitap, PO, Satish Arvind, VP Marketing, Unocon, Shrish Gurutha, Director Products, PhonePe. And to moderate this session, I have Jasmeet Singh Gandhi, Head Global BD, Clevertap. May I request everyone to please join.
Hello and welcome. It's a great session. I think a lot to think about. While they focus more on acquisition and engagement, I think the next logical step for us in understanding the engagement and its impact, which is retention, and then of course decoding what it means for each one of you, how that is delivered. More importantly, how is that impacting what is now becoming a very central theme for every business, which is lifetime value. So we have seen that in the previous session we've seen that how the deficit of access in the earlier stage of people led to offline being the primary delivery method. But now in the last 2.5 years, we've seen that a lot of that focus has shifted to online. A large scale of migration of users has happened, and you guys have obviously seen that, benefited from it, grown with it. Yeah, it has got its own challenges. A lot of user data is now sort of suddenly emerging, yeah, especially in your category where you're dealing with money, or you're dealing with advice, or you're dealing with financial products, where credibility matters the most, right? So this data not only needs to be analyzed in the right way, also for you to engage with them, it needs to be actionable. And that's the new challenge of digital marketing, right? How do you get data which is just not analyzed, but is also actionable? So that's something that we will talk about. The third thing which has happened is that the interaction with your brand, your application, your website, the entry point, the exit, and the time in between is now decided by the user. It can happen anytime, anywhere, in any circumstance, which is out of your control. So it brings along a lot of other challenges in terms of brand marketing, brand experience, right? Because the environment is not under your control at all. So there is no peak time, or there is no great time, though there will be cohorts and there will be data to see that, but I think that's a new challenge as well in marketing. Earlier we used to have the categories like born in the cloud. Now we have a new category of emerging startups, born in the pandemic, where your ability to adapt has to be 10x, and you're dealing with really dynamic issues on a daily basis, right? So having said that, I think what I would like to definitely do before we start is get a brief introduction from each one of you, and then we can dive into the discussion from there on. Yeah. So why don't we start from here?
All right. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Satish, and I head marketing as VP for UnoCoin, which is one of the oldest exchange of cryptos in India. Right. So I have a background of crypto and blockchain for last 3 to 4 years. So before UnoCoin, I was heading marketing for Emergo, which is the business arm of Cardano blockchain. So which is the third generation blockchain, in the lines of Bitcoin, Ethereum, right? So overall, I have around 7 years of experience over marketing and branding, with last 4 years completely into blockchain and crypto, right? So trying to evangelize crypto and blockchain across India, which is my one of the key areas which I was working on and currently focusing on as well.
Hi, my name is Shrish. I'm a director of product management at PhonePe. What I do at PhonePe is I look at all of their growth-related products, so be it for internal growth or even for external marketing purposes. I've been with PhonePe for a little over 4 years now, doing pretty much what I just explained. Prior to that, I was with Swiggy for a little while, right? So in total, been in the Indian startup ecosystem like for a little while. right? So yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
Hey guys, hi. So I'm Hitarth. I lead the marketing team at Frio. Frio is India's first credit-led neobank. Our flagship product is called MoneyTap. You must have heard about it. It's a lending app, crossed over more than 17 million installs. I'm one of the founding members, been here in the industry for last 6 years, seen the startup grow from scratch to where it is today. And yeah, happy to be here.
I'm Raj. I'm the Vice President of WazirX, India's largest cryptocurrency exchange. Before that, I was with a startup which got acquired by Tinder. It was a dating startup. And before that, I was with Jio, where I launched Jio and Jio apps. And prior to that, I spent about 10-12 years in gaming with games to win / contest2win.com. Glad to be here.
Great, thanks. Thank you, guys. So we'll take off from where the last session ended. Okay. So lifetime value has become central, right? And we know that acquisition costs being what they are, and complexity of channels leading to a lot more challenges to your life. What has been the role of LTV, and have you seen it change in the last couple of years, especially? And what are the strategies that you're adopting to retain users who are sort of coming to your platform? Because retention is the new acquisition, as everybody talks about today. So what are you doing individually? And this is open to all. What are you doing individually in your capacity in your organizations to address this, as a central issue? So one, what does LTV mean in your org today? How has it changed? And what are you doing about it? So if anybody would like to start.
Sure. So all of us, I'm pretty sure, know about LTV, how things happen, but definitely for a lending startup, for a startup which is attracting maybe 100 users through the door and then rejecting 90% of them, asking them, sorry, I can't give you product. So you first create a marketing engine wherein you are getting a lot of people in and then letting them know, sorry, the product is not available, obviously for certain reasons. So it becomes very difficult for us to retain that base. Once people are given a credit line or a credit product, the retention is not that much of a big problem because they'll stay on. Finance and access to money is one such thing that people don't, maybe it will be the last app for me to delete consciously from my device. But what we have seen is that retaining users whom you have earlier denied the access and asking them to come back again, reapplying on the app again for another access to the credit line, that's a pretty heavy challenge. And we have tried to solve this problem by creating a lot of content, by creating some kind of a transparency in the system that, hey, here's a very logical reason why you could not get the product today. And we are obviously very sorry about it. But here's how you can improve your credit profile. Here's what is missing in why you could not get the access to the product. But that's not the only challenge. The challenge is that the moment you deny the product, they'll uninstall. So then you have to go back to the user via different communication media and ask them to go through the same friction step once again, same painful step once again. So that's where a lot of product thinking has come in from our team, wherein we have created some mechanisms that users just get started once again at the very same point. They don't need to go through the same process again. Obviously, this needs to be validated multiple times before you're giving money. But how can we manage this through the whole customer experience within the app? That's been a core to our managing the whole LTV as well as the retention part of it. Now, maybe from an LTV standpoint, if you look at it, yes, users who are delivering money to you, who are giving you revenue today, it's good to retain them. But then again, there's a lot of competition out there in the market.
right? Interest rates keep on changing. Processes keep on changing. So how can we manage that part, and how are you being competitive in your value offering? How are you trying to maximize the user's perception that yes, I have cracked a great deal? That's another major challenge that we have, and we've solved it to a certain level again by partnering with multiple folks, by figuring out that some of your loyal users who have shown a positive movement on their credit profiles should be given the benefit of better interest rates, better deals, maybe not charging them any kind of a foreclosure fee, etc., etc. So that's been one major part for our LTV and retention strategy.
So shall I go for it? Okay, cool. We are all searching for the holy grail, where the CPA and LTV intersection happens, and we are trying to get it closer and closer. The crypto industry is slightly different in the sense people are fascinated by it. Okay, you download the ad, you download the app, but then what happens is that you hit the first roadblock. The first roadblock is that you have to complete your KYC. Now, that is where a lot of drop-off happens. That is the first problem that we need to solve. The second thing that happens, the second biggest drop-off that happens is the first deposit. Because the powers to be love crypto so much, let me assure you, it's not a painless process. So there is a little bit of friction, and we have to jump many hurdles, jump through the hoops to get the guy to actually make his first deposit. But once he's invested into your platform and he makes the first deposit, from our experience, he's there on your platform for quite some time. So the LTV part of it, we are aware of our numbers, and we are aware that users stick onto our platform for a long period of time. But I'm also aware that sometimes he also has multiple apps. So he'll have a Unicorn app. He might have competition also. So back to your question, how do we retain? So I've just told you the blockages that happen and how notifications can help get these guys back. So the most important thing that we try and do is we've looked at our numbers and we try and get them as early as possible to complete their KYC. And KYC is a tedious process. We have tried to make it as easy as possible using technology, but that happens. The second thing we also do is that through notifications again, encourage users to make their deposits. We have different programs in play to make them do that. We have different hooks. And of course, again, it seems to be the best answer for everybody here. Content plays a very important role. The right notification plays a very, very important role. So we get really very, very, very picky about the notifications that you send to the users and make sure that he converts.
Right. So see, one of the very trivial, challenges that the user faces in the crypto space, right, as KYCs or the first deposit, which he told, right. So apart from that, see, from my perspective, right, so the whole industry is kind of very hot. It's very nascent and emerging, getting a lot of limelights in all the sides, right, both positive as well as negative or gray, right. So acquisition, it's kind of, it's kind of flowing, right? But in the sense, I'm not saying that it is unimportant or we don't need to put an effort. So that is equally important, but it is much easier than retain, right? One of the reason why is that so is I feel the major criteria is about the knowledge asymmetry, right? It is like majorly, apart from very handful of excellent people, majority of the people are getting into it because of the hype. Majorly because of the price. They don't understand the underlying technology and stuff, right? And whenever they get into the hype, right? So it means that the particular asset is already gone way up, right? And they are kind of getting into the somewhere in the top, and there is a high likely chance that they burn their fingers and never want to come again, right? So that is one of the major challenge which I feel that that is happening, right? So just to give a classic example, 2017 we had a euphoric bull run, right? So lot of people flowed in, which challenged our whole operations team. Like we have to, scale up the team overnight, right? But if you see, after that we had the classic cycle crash, and now again in 2021, lot of people who left in 2017 started coming back inquiring that I forgot my passwords and things like that, right? And they're doing the same thing again, right? So one of the key factors what I'm thinking is the challenge to retain people is to make them do the right things, right? So it's not only about the price, they have to understand more about it. So we are trying to create the platform where they could able to get more sense out of what they're actually doing. And so also one thing is about awareness and providing the educational content. Another thing is to at least as a checklist kind of a stuff, try to give them a space where they can avoid mistakes, right? Don't, it's something like because of the hype, don't go all out, put all the money at one shot because of the fear of missing out and stuff, right? So we have some some features like systematic buying plan, puts every day small amount, how to diversify. So these are another a non-tangible or kind of a stuff which we feel that would play a key role in getting the people invested. So it's about the stickiness, right? So they wanted to keep coming in because there is something in the platform, not just the price. Because trading is always riskier. 10 times you can be successful, but one loss could throw you out of the whole psychology, and you don't want to ever come back. So that is one of the key challenge which we feel that in the long run we wanted to tackle, and that will play immense role in getting the customer back and back.
Thank you. It's interesting that all of us are in the financial services space, I must say, because in some shape or form we're touching people's money, right? We at PhonePe are on the little bit of flip side, which is we are just not only on investment or general financial services, we are on payments and banking as well, right, inherently. One of the, so typically the way we think about it is, I'll take a slightly product-led view to it, primarily because I'm not a marketer directly. The way we normally attack this problem is we try and get the basics right. What I mean by that is, much like you've got a KYC step in a lot of the financial services, you've got a bank linkage step in a lot of payment apps, right? And you've got to set your MPIN. And the UPI onboarding process, fortunately, is slightly easier than the regular financial services setup, but that doesn't mean it isn't frictionful, right? And there's a lot of thought that goes into ensuring two things, right? One is we try and keep it really simple, right? Which is to say that we try and define what hygiene experiences look like. We try and define what delight also looks like, right? And it's not an either-or situation at any point in time, because, but we try and take a relationship view to the customer, right? Which is, we try and get the absolute basics right in the initial parts of their journey, right? And the intent at that point in time is to make them feel safe and secure. And over a period of time, the idea is to actually get them into the delight spaces of things, right? Now, this is a journey, unfortunately, right? You can't sort of jump and say, oh, let me try and make you, in some shape and form, like do 10 things over the course of 5 days, right? It never plays out like that, right? Your hard bottleneck at any point in time is the amount of money that a customer's got to spend or invest or whatever that is. So typically the way we think about retention is we try and get the basics right. So for instance, we try and ensure that there's never any reason to uninstall the app, right? Are we broadly accepted? Are our basic success rates really good, right? Like, we think of, we've got a terminology that we use, which is the product just works, right? And that's the way we think about it. That's typically been our retention strategy, right? It's also why a lot of our marketing effort goes into ensuring that we do this at a brand level and at a product level, rather than taking very classic external marketing strategies to it. That said, it's very much needed. And that's normally the way we think about it in the company, and it's yielded good results for us, right? I think we've got relatively good success on this front. So usually that's the way we normally break it up, right? Also, I think given that we are an application that is very, very broad, like you can literally transfer money to someone to buy an insurance policy. So one problem we do have is just the breadth of businesses we operate in tends to make things a little tricky at times. But that said, I think the idea is to keep it really simple. We've normally seen, I think, given the size of user base we are as a brand, right? If you don't keep it simple, you will bear the cost at some point, right? It gets very tricky at that point, right? There was a lot of talk in the previous session about vernacular and Bharat and tier 2 and tier 3, right? And what practically are people trying to say is, at any point in time, you want to keep your product extremely simple for customers to understand and interact with, right? And there's a lot of focus that goes in the teams to ensure that the consumers have a really, really smooth, seamless experience, right? Yeah, maybe not a classic answer, but perhaps.
No, great. I think some of the insights are really cool. Thanks for that. So it's a couple of things emerging from this, right? One is based on the frequency of usage, okay, of your app, of your product, of your platform, you will have a certain strategy for acquisition and engagement. And I think each one of your businesses is different, and user experiences and user or need for the user to interact with your brand in a certain frequency. The other theme that is coming, and I will delve on that later, but the other theme that is coming upon from here is that, and what has become a buzzword today is, product-led growth, right? All of you are operating in a highly competitive scenario today, be it trading, be it payments, be it buy now, pay later, or financing. A lot of emerging brands, a lot of emerging startups. So the question here is, how do you sort of differentiate in an environment like this? What you're calling user experience, right, is what I mean by product-led. The user experience has many shades to it, as we all know. So you mentioned onboarding, KYC, or you mentioned advisory, or say holding hands with the customer to make sure that they don't lose money. All that is part of it. But how do you really differentiate? What is the what we call or what we understand as innovation today in a competitive emerging scenario like this? What does innovation mean in these categories? Because each one of you has a sliver of the financial portfolio. In each of your orgs, what does innovation mean in such cases? At a certain level, I'm sure it's a brand play, pure brand play, but under the hood, there are certain things that you need to keep doing with more rapidity based, depending on which category you're coming from. So what does it really mean inside your organizations? Can you give us a peek on what is this day-to-day thinking on what does innovation mean? Because I think that's important for at least a lot of us marketeers to understand today, how this whole thing has impacted marketing and what does innovation really mean in such scenarios.
So I'll take it. For me, innovation, I'll start, I'm sorry, is making sure that we are ready for peak traffic, which is very, very difficult in this age and time because we are growing by about 44% month on month. So we jack up our servers 2x, 3x, and then something happens and there is a surge in demand. It could be Indians going crazy over Shiba Inu and my servers melt. So it seems very obvious, add more servers, right? But let me assure you it isn't, because we keep adding servers and every 3 months we face the same problem because of the sheer demand of the space. So, and this is not specific to WazirX. Coinbase has similar problems, which is the world's second largest exchange. Binance happens to Binance. Binance is the world's largest exchange. So though we know, there is a train coming and we are desperately trying to put the tracks in order, it becomes a big challenge to make sure that, we make sure that our services work fine, but more often than not, it becomes a big strain to make that happen. So the category is very unique in this space that, a lot of people, so what is happening is that we know a lot of these typical trite comments. India is a young country and, we have a lot of youngsters and all that. So this is a direct beneficiary, the sector, the crypto sector is a direct beneficiary of that. So I remember when I first got my first paycheck, my first thing was to put my money in the PPF account. These guys are skipping all that. They are not, they are least bothered about, you have a transition. Oldies like me will remember it was from PPF to stocks, and then you burn your fingers in the stock market, and then you move to mutual funds, and then you put a part of it in FD for your, your contingency plans and all that. It's all gone out of the window in the last 3 years, I think, because we all know that, youth are impetuous, it's a young country and all that. So just like how we skipped the landline revolution, we went directly to mobile. I think what is happening is that we are in a critical phase of the crypto industry where people are skipping, the traditional investment options. Rightly or wrongly, most of it, as Satish mentioned, it's driven by greed, it's driven by fear of missing out. It's driven by get rich quick schemes. You see crazy numbers, you see news articles saying that markets are going crazy, but the category, because of that, because this category has grown so much, we are struggling to do a lot of things that would look hygiene and would look like it should be done, but it takes time to get it done. And even if you jack up your servers by 3x every month, it's very, very difficult. So to answer your the question, keep things easy is the right thing to do, but it's very, very difficult in this industry.
Right. So when we launched almost 6 years back, we had a great differentiating factor because we are the first ones in the lending industry to give such a flexible product. Credit lines only existed for businesses. For an end user, for you and me, it was not existent. And even if, let's say, I had to do some format of that, I had to first put in my money in a large bank, and then they would give me an overdraft. So this was a product at that point of time which was very unique, and we had to spend a lot of time just to figure out the pulse of the customer, that what is it that the customer actually wants. So we almost spent a year building another app, and we scrapped it, and then we launched MoneyTap. But now if you look at it, now after the app has matured to such a huge base, innovation, you just can't force an innovation on a certain engine that is going on. And in that scenario, if I look back, I think innovation comes more from figuring out what is going wrong, or what is the insight in this flow that is already flowing right now, right? What is happening right now? Is there any kind of a feedback that is coming from customer service? And let me give you an example. So what we started hearing is that a lot of people will take a loan for a very short period of time because of some need, and then they have some money, so they want to foreclose quickly. So is there something that we can do quickly to make this foreclosure process seamless? So that's maybe an innovation from a normal customer experience perspective. Similarly, what other product features we can add within the app which can help user take a better decision, right? So we started playing around on a lot of users when they are, maybe I don't like the deal that you're offering me, maybe the interest rates are too high, or the tenor is not really what I'm seeking for. So we started tweaking a few features in the UX in such a manner that it will give user an option. We understand that, okay, you don't like this. Is this better or that is better? And the moment you throw that ball in front of the user on that screen, the problem statement is changed now. Now user is going into a very different psyche. So this was the second part, maybe for a matured app like this. And as we, during pandemic itself, we realized that the users that we are attracting is on a huge spectrum. By that, what I mean is, there are some users who are looking for a loan for just maybe 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 for a couple of months. And then there is another user persona that is looking for a lending, for a loan for almost 12 months or 36 months with a large amount. So you can't be treating these two users in the same experience. So is there something that can be done for optimizing the KYC process, for optimizing the whole flow that the user goes through? If you are going for a very heavy loan, it's fine for me to maybe add additional steps to verify whether you are eligible for that loan or not. But if I'm only doing a very small loan, I'm okay to skip a few steps, take a little bit chance, take a little bit higher risk appetite on that user and let you go along. eventually, if I have to make you jump from one spectrum to another spectrum, obviously you need to do KYC, obviously you need to give me data points, obviously you need to give me hard documents, etc. But that can, one innovation from our side was that we don't need it from everybody. Why are we asking it from everybody? It looks like a common sense thing, but once the whole momentum was there, this was such a big insight for our team that why are we treating the same, why are we treating two different personas, two different users with two different needs in a similar manner? Can we optimize the whole flow in such a manner that it's okay for that user's intent and the consideration that he's looking for? So that was maybe innovation at our side.
So you're basically touching upon segmentation and basing experiences or product line creations addressing those needs, correct?
Correct.
Whereas,
Yes.
Whereas, say, Raj touched upon a very basic requirement, which is infrastructure. Okay. In a regulated environment like yours, what is the equivalent of infrastructure? Is it attracting capital at a lower rate of interest, or your IRR, anything which is as basic as that, which would lead to an innovation which will let you offer, say, more competitive rates in the market?
Sure. So I think for us, maybe that kind of a constraint, and if I have to put a parallel analogy to this, would be figuring out, is there any additional data point which can help me take a risk on this risky customer? Is there something else that I can maybe ask the user a little bit? Because generally what happens is you have your algorithms, you have your scorecarding mechanisms, people go through it, and you have a yes and a no. Now, is there a possibility with any additional information, can this no be turned into a maybe or a yes?
So risk analysis.
It's risk analysis, it's data streams, it's any additional, and by the way, every data that you ask from user, it's a big pain. Right? Because it's now again, he goes into a very different curveball that I gave you everything and you have still rejected me. And you have to ask for one more data point. So it's a very big task if you look at it, but that really helps us push the envelope a little bit more.
Right, thanks.
All right. So the way we approach innovation, so as you rightly mentioned a word, product-led growth, right? So I firmly believe that one of the very, very critical and important marketing tool, which creates word of mouth, which acquires users, which upsell, cross-sell, and do all sort of stuff, is our products itself, right? So product plays a very, very key role, and that's where we focus majorly on our innovative, space, right? So we do a lot of research on bringing something exciting into our platform. So it's like, we wanted to give multiple use cases to our users who, once we did all the hard work of acquiring the users and, bringing them the stickiness, trying to educate them. So what next, right? So, and similar to, all the financial products like mutual funds, whatever. So every user or every individual has a individual or different needs, right? So on that perspective, like someone who wants to, go for a long term, as I told, who doesn't want to take a high risk or doesn't have much of a knowledge. So something like, in an analogy which is, SIP, right? So where they can put every day, every week or monthly, so this much of amount in BTC, which is like dollar cost averaging. So that is one thing. And another one, if there is definitely, there will always be uncertain circumstances where they would need an emergency fund. So it is like the last resort should be like selling an asset, right? So instead of that, we came up with a product called lending, where instead of selling their BTC, they can lend it and get a temporary, as similar to a gold loan or something like that, right? So they pay interest till the time they pledge it, and so at least end of the day, the one of the highly appreciating asset or highly valued asset is not sold or not gone out of their hand. Right, and so someone who did all the hard work to understand, about this crypto space, which very few people, get the complete knowledge or a high-level knowledge. So now they know the ecosystem. Now they know, okay, what is Bitcoin, how these things works, and everything. Now they are ready to invest, and they could see thousands of cryptos, and they were like, what to do now, right? So then we come up with some, basket of things like, trying to, again, taking inspiration from the traditional markets, like, categorize them as blue chip, mid cap, small cap. So obviously the risk will perceive there, right, based on the categories. And so we, categorize them, and that basket will diversify based on the risk appetite, right? So that's another thing. And there are a lot of, small things which we have, like, that put to use in their cryptos, right? Like if they have Bitcoin, so they can very well use it to give, to recharge their FASTag, mobile phones or things, buy gift vouchers. So which is kind of, not directly conflicting with, as a legal tender, which is like kind of as a, deep lying back-end tech stack, right? So it is not directly paying gift voucher or the end product with Bitcoin, but there is a route where it will be converted into the fiat or the INR, and then the INR is paid to the vendor and things like that. So these are the multiple ways, like when someone has, got into the space, has their crypto assets, so trying to put them into, segmenting them, their need, and trying to showcase them. So these are the things that you can do, right? And this is just a starting, like, in fact, the whole space, it's only in the speculative and, the DeFi or very, very high level, utility is what the space has entered till now. So the deep utilities is what we are going to see in coming years, and I think innovation going to play a very key role in providing that utility, right? So decentralized Ola, decentralized Amazons, decentralized Swiggy. So all these things are what going to be anticipated, right? And how we provide or be going to be relevant during that time, right? So that's where we see innovation in our approach.
So you bring up an interesting point on information-based or content-based, differentiation. A better educated user will have more stickiness, more trust, and therefore. Raj, one question to you. We've seen, at least I've seen that, there are new terms like he mentioned, DeFi, for example, etc. Is it possible to create a community-based approach to your category where you have a platform or a content-led offering which brings together, people who are seeking information, making them understand this category deeper, and therefore getting into it in a more informed way, and from there emerges a set of people who are seen as influencers, to use that word, in your category. Is there any scope for that?
Damn good question, Jasmeet. So if you go to YouTube and you type WazirX, you will find thousands of videos. I have a channel and I have about 50,000 subscribers, which is not small. But the most interesting content and the best content is made by random people out there who are passionate about the space. So one thing you have to understand about crypto, it's not ordinary people like you and me. You have this monolithic mass like middle class and all that. This is a cult. So these guys are absolutely out there to go and convert you. It's evangelism at its very best. So, even I, for that matter, I'm a late entrant, 45 years old it's not the right time to get into crypto. It's more of a young man's game or a young woman's game. But the idea is that once you get down this rabbit hole, you see what it is all. You see, it's like in the Matrix, the red pill and the blue pill, and then you see the world of possibilities that are out there. And then what you do is that you automatically take it upon yourself to go out there and try. So in my level, it would be to speak to you, and like I told you, you have to get into the space. But there are people out there who actually gone there and created content that is spectacular. Now this is across languages, this is across genres. It is tutorials. They gone ahead and taken the effort to actually create tutorials. So again, there are two reasons to it. One is they really like the space, and second is YouTube has made it very easy for monetization. So yes, the community forms by itself in crypto. We are very lucky to be in this space. So I don't know whether the others, like a PhonePe or a MoneyTap, will have this mass of people who are actually out there evangelizing the space. So we, Satish and I are very, very lucky that people out there take it upon themselves to go and form communities. So, I have thousands of groups on Telegram. Telegram is the most, so, again, this is a very good insight that most people won't know. Like, forget WhatsApp, forget all your random apps. Telegram is where the most traction happens in crypto. So you have thousands of people who aggregate on Telegram in different contexts. So, you have high-end traders, you have people giving out signals, you have people educating people in different languages. So they organize themselves and they gravitate towards a platform that they are most comfortable with. So if you're a beginner, you'll be on YouTube. If you're a high-end trader, you gradually, at the other end of the spectrum, you move to Telegram. So it's what we try and do is just stay out of the way. So, we don't want to mess, sometimes it's the right thing to do. So, we just make sure that sanity is maintained, no wrong information is given out. People are not gaming the system or trying to game the market, which happens. So that we just, observe and just step in when it is necessary to.
Great, thanks. Shrish, no, crypto has the benefit of being the most recent of the categories and most unregulated.
Yeah.
Whereas you guys have now become the most mature in the category, right? Yeah. And you, by that yardstick, compete with huge brands like Google, Amazon, Paytm, etc. So, in your case, how do you start to differentiate? Is it by adding more product lines like you guys are doing currently with more, like insurance, etc.? Are you by expanding into another user base segment, or do you go deeper into the, the mature segment and try and, better the experience? What is it inside a mature category like yours?
So while our payments business is a mature business, we have a ton of other business which is just kicking off, right? So I think I've at least been with PhonePe for 4 years, and I think it's safe to say that we don't think there's a silver bullet to it. There's a lot of diligence and there's a lot of focus that comes into it. I think the way we think about it at this point in time in our journey is as an application that is extremely ubiquitous and like pretty much starting to becoming so utilitarian that it's starting to be present everywhere all the time. We think of our role as a very, very responsible partner to a consumer's life. And what that means is that at any point in time, whether we want to go broad or we want to go deep, the question we try and answer is what is the problem we solve for customers, right? And there is an incredible amount of focus and time that we spend to try and answer that question. Now, unfortunately, that question is too abstract, right, to form marketing strategy around, right? But usually, answers to that question do inform marketing strategy, right? Be it for our insurance businesses, be it for our investment businesses, be it for our offline payments business, right? We are in a fairly broad spectrum of things, right? So to innovate at any point in time, I think we try and remain true to the problem, right? I think that is something that we pride ourselves on, something that we focus on a whole lot, right? Now, that could mean something as tactical as trying to tweak a funnel in a particular product line. It could be something as smart as changing your, like tweaking your business models, right? Or it could be as smart as even changing something like your operating processes, right? We do not leave any stone unturned in terms of innovation in that sense, right? Any place where we believe there's a problem and the problem is large enough, we try and solve for the lowest common denominator, which is the broadest base as much as possible. And we try and take it problem by problem, right? Usually at any point in time, the reason why we focus on that particular question, and we believe it's an extremely important question, is because all other functions sort of need to rally around that. Like your selling strategy has got to change, your like finances and all of change, right? But at the heart of it, right, we try and keep the consumer at the heart of it. And the way we keep the consumer at the heart of it is we try and stay true to the problem at that particular business line, right? To take, let's say, a business that we are pretty big in already, right? Which is selling insurance to customers, right? We're pretty large already, right? But that doesn't mean that A, we will get complacent, or B, we will try and lose our focus from the problem, right? Our intent at any point in time is to ensure that we are able to penetrate into places and really, really progress people financially, right? In the truest sense, right? And we've got a unique opportunity in that sense. And we take that seriously, and at any point in time to innovate, we go back to that first question. Now, it can look like a little bit, it does, I would believe that if you're not someone from PhonePe and you come in from the outside, it might irk you because we tend to ask the question often enough that it would irritate some people, I think. But I think that's the way we focus on that, right? It's very rare for, someone to come and say, hey, we've got this amazing solution and think it'll solve everything, right? Even all the examples that were taken on this roundtable, I think is a part of trying to keep the customer at the heart of it. Sure, there is always a business angle, right? We are not, I mean, we are for-profit entities in that sense, right? But I think that focus on what the user's problem is really is how we tend to innovate as much as we can, right? And we sort of take it from there, right? I mean, there's a lot of other pieces that need to fall into the puzzle. Like you rightly mentioned, right? We are regulated by a ton of different government bodies, and we work with regulators closely to ensure that the right, set of processes are in place for customers and stuff like that. But at the heart of it, the idea is to try and ensure that we have a safe, secure, progressive environment for customers to thrive in, and we keep the focus on that.
Sorry, Jasmeet, I'd like to ask Shirish more directly than Jasmeet did. What is it that you did right that, you and Google Pay, PhonePe and Google Pay are doing right that a Paytm, for example, or an Amazon Pay, they are slightly lagging behind from my perception, of things. What is it that PhonePe is doing right that, for example, a Paytm isn't? If you can state that.
I'll refrain from commenting on our competitors, but I can tell you that, like I've said earlier in the discussion as well, right? We try and keep our customers at the heart of everything, right? So we try and ensure that the product just works. Now, why customers like us better and like, let's say, some other brands are where they are, it's hard for me to comment on that bit at this point.
So I guess what is emerging from here, Raj, is that the importance of managing customer experience, or what we call in our parlance a 360-degree view, right? Because mobile is the end interface, but the consumer, even before he downloads the app or comes into the app, there is a ton of information that lies in other places, which has to be consolidated and made sense of, okay? And I think platforms which are doing that better are able to differentiate in a much better fashion. So that brings me to the next question. So, at the start of this discussion, we said the influx of data, user data is huge. And all of you guys are obviously benefiting from it. Though it can be sort of, in a nutshell, put as a 360-degree view, but it means that a whole lot of analysis of under the hood, right? Where is the user coming from? What is he doing? What are the channels which are influencing his behavior, etc. Needs to be sort of thought through, understood, applied, for example, in a segmented way. Okay, when to how do you manage from, say, an app to a offline or an app to a call center experience? Even those, the omni-channel way of tackling a customer is, everybody is worried about today, because if you don't manage that well, you will see a drop off, you will see churn. And managing churn is your primary motive today, and that's where retention comes in. So the question therefore is, to manage all of this, there is obviously a whole stack of technology which is available today, which you don't have to develop in-house, and you sort of partner with the ecosystem to do that. But it obviously brings in a lot of its own challenges. If you can, quickly touch upon what are you guys doing in terms of managing this, user or an integrated user experience, and what are the typical challenges you face when you work with the ecosystem?
I can take this first because
Sure.
we are madly broad as a brand. So I think there is a few components to that question. I think before the technology stack, I think the first things first, purely in terms of marketing, is to unify who you are as a brand persona, right? I think I've seen a lot of times across the board, right? And something I think PhonePe does relatively well is to try and unify tonality, persona, all of the softer aspects of marketing. And the reason that becomes critical is if you're able to do that well, I would believe that at any point in time, every channel has its own esoteric needs of how you interact and how you set it up, right? Your support channels will look different, your social channels will look different, your regular push channels will look different, right? Every channel has got its time, place, and merit in your overall portfolio. So you can't really sort of go past those constraints, if I can call them that. It gets difficult. But as long as you've gotten your overall brand positioning like really, really spot on as far as how you want to maintain your relationship with a customer, I think everything sort of like flows in from there, right? And that's how we try and think about it, right? We try and ensure that if you're talking to us on any number of channels, you feel like you're talking to like one entity, right? Like one person, right? Now, every technology stack that we've seen after that, and there's a large chunk of it that we actually either partner or build in-house, we try and ensure that that problem remains in focus, right? Because I think it can get really, really frustrating for customers, right? And hence have a really leaky repeat or retention bucket if you do not ensure that that consistency of experience is there across all of your touch points, right? I think that gets really tricky. Case in point is us, where we've got a very, very simple payments business, right? When I say simple in terms of just interactions, and we've got a complicated workflow like buying insurance on the platform. Now, we can't suddenly try and behave like two different applications suddenly where one customer comes in, right? So I think it all stems from that starting point, which is your like, once you've built a brand and once you've got a consumer interaction going, is to try and unify as quickly as you can on what you want to be for the customer, right? And try and ensure the tonality, the experience is as consistent as possible. I mean, this is best effort, of course. It gets very tricky because you got to change it from product to product. I think it starts from there. What I've normally seen happen after that is all the technology layers, there is enough and more going around, right? And we can find ways to make those channels work in that regard. I think that, I believe, is the tricky part here.
We are kind of learning, so we are trying to standardize all our communication tonality across the channels for some time to see how that pan out, and we are also trying to see we can go specific channel wise, and we are trying to segment give a face to the different customers, who he is, what he wants, right, what is the end objective, right, and where he spend his time, and we kind of picture them and try to come up with a narrative for those kind of people, right? So we're trying a lot, so I think it's still in the experimentation stage, at least for us.
So I'll be the most specific of the lot. So we have a very clear communication strategy with respect to the customer life cycle. So we have a different, so depending upon where you are, we have a communication plan that is rolled out to you. So if you are pre-KYC, if you just downloaded the app and you have not completed your KYC, you have a set of messages that go out to you. If you haven't done your first deposit, goes out there. If you are in the first 3 months, which is very crucial. So we have plotted out the entire life cycle of a customer, and we're trying to reach out to a relevant and make him get a relevant message. How we deliver it is through a combination. This will interest you, Jasmeet, is mixed panel plus a pusher service. So it's as simple as that, but the buckets are there, the cohorts are there, and that's how we go about it.
Any challenges that you face in terms of managing varied, platforms within your core platform?
We are facing some challenges with respect to mixed panel because they are sunsetting a couple of their products. So we are in the process of evaluating different options. Yes, so that discussion is still happening as we speak at this point of time.
So for us as well, we have mapped the whole customer journey, and there are various touch points that we use. But because the whole behavior of a user interacting with our business is in cycles, and that cycles are very far away. It's like 3 months, 6 month cycles, right? You come to the app, you install. If you don't get the product, now I can reach out to you, or you'll consider me, or effectively you'll be meaningful to the business only after 3 to 6 months. Before that, your credit history won't change, so we can't do much about it. So that way, yes, there is a BAU, there is a whole customer journey that's mapped via one of the automation tools, very similar to CleverTap. And we don't touch that. We have done our whole set of A/B testing, figuring out what works, how to touch, how to figure out what the touch points would be, what messaging works for a certain persona, for a customer acquired from a certain channel, for example, a digital channel versus a partnerships channel, right? How to communicate to them. So that part is fairly stable and set up. But the challenge that we face, and maybe that's where the manual heavy weightlifting comes into picture, is when we try to get the users back into the game after 6 months, and that's when we use individual platforms like Netcore, like Value First. These are some of the email engines that are there. These can be integrated with the automation tool that is there, but still some of the ad hoc campaigns do need to be created in a little bit of a rudimentary manner, because certain segments need different kind of motivations to come back again. So that's how we have been. Yeah, I think it is a challenge, obviously, yes. But when you become big and you have different kind of challenges with your user, and especially for a rejection product, right? It's a little bit of a challenge to put users on a automation cycle.
So I'd just like to add here one thing is that what we marketers, lose sight of sometimes is that, with the amount of tools and the amount of data that is available for us, we forget, as Hidat mentioned, the sheer brain power that makes a difference. So this is my favorite anecdote. At all round tables I usually mention. So during when I was running a dating startup, which eventually got acquired. So the first thing that you do is that you run a lot of ads, right? And then you figured that, okay, fine. India is, internet is 80-20. So you put a lot of women in your ads, it should work, right? But then we found out that no, when there is a mix of people, when there are males and females, those ads work better. Why? Because if it's only women, it looks fake. It looks like a scam. Okay, so then that was the first insight. This comes out through A/B testing and through raw, you sit and you think why it's not working. Then you try something else. So then we put, 3 women and 2 men. The ad started working better. Then what we did was that we had this beautiful insight where we said we just put a green dot next to those photographs. So it showed as if these guys are live at that point of time on the platform. Your click-throughs and your performance went up, your notifications went up dramatically. So this is both Google as well as your notifications that are happening on the mobile phone. So when you see, you get a picture of a good-looking girl or a guy, and there is a green button, the tendency to do it is more. And all this comes after studying your creatives and through the brain power that you put behind it, because the data can't tell you that this is what you should do. So it's just simple common sense application on top of the data that really helps. So A/B testing is we swear by it, but as we grow larger and the systems become more unmanageable, I think it becomes, when you're smaller and more nimble, it's easier to do A/B testing, but it's more difficult to do it as you grow bigger. The systems aren't in place and you are afraid to break a lot of other things. So that is a practical problem that we are facing at the state we are in at this point of time.
Okay, great. I think great insights around the table. So yeah, I think as a summary, as a rounding last question, one thing that you guys have done to, what you would label as best practice to increase LTV, just one. If you were to take, the summary of all that we discussed, in your organization, in your mind, what is that one best practice that has really helped you to jump from 0 to 1 in your LTV criteria? Quickly.
Shirish, are you going? Okay, cool. One thing that I have done is it's still paying off, is that we were an English-first organization, sitting in our cozy metro, Bangalore and Bombay-based and Delhi-based predominantly. We first became Hindi in the first month of my joining, Hindi first. And now I'm rolling out a program based on data again, is that we are going regional, big time regional. So again, South, we are going specific to different languages, and then we will eventually roll out. So based on data, understanding the processes, we've realized that the kicker comes in explaining concepts, as Satish said, making concepts. Crypto is not an easy subject to understand in the first time. You have to dive deep into it. In regional languages does help.
Sure. So for us, I think the journey from 0 to 1, and maybe I'm being a bit emotional over here, because this was a time wherein we had to reach out and understand the consumer psyche, and that was very difficult because trying to introduce a new product, etc. So for me, I think if the takeaway has to be, it has to be playing with raw data, playing and understanding how consumer behavior is, and maybe even just picking up the phone call, talking to a few customers, and getting the pulse that chal kya raha hai. What is the scene behind in the consumer psyche? That is what has helped us multiple times to make strategies, both in product development, both in marketing approach, both in pricing and risk management. So that has been the core for us multiple times.
So going back to the first question what I responded, right? So the key is providing or the entry through knowledge, right? So trying to evangelize what this space is about. That has been our key focus for last few months. Not getting into aggressive marketing, right? So that's also two ends of the spectrum. One is getting new people convinced to get into the market with confidence, and another one is like people who got into the market due to hype also get that stickiness to get that enlightenment, right? So there are multiple ways which we are doing, like through colleges, through we have university, right, which is like educational portal. So these are the things which we are doing. So more than on the volume game, it's about trying to grow the whole ecosystem gradually is what is one of the key factors that we are looking for.
Yeah, if I have to summarize for us, I think the way in which we approach retention, we approach our business in general is we got to make our customer and our data work together. It's never an either or situation, and we take a lot of pride and put in a lot of focus to make it work together. It's a lot of time thinking whether we can. Micro-segmenting and stuff does work. It doesn't, but I think, like Raj rightly pointed out, I think if you don't, you got to use your raw brain power, right? And it's answering that question at that point as to what is the right problem to solve for customers is where we do. And we try and make that data work in the conjunction of that bit, right? And that's how we try and think of it as an integrated problem.
Jasmeet, I just remembered one thing from my Geo days. So if you are in the payments business, you'll realize how fickle it is, because your success rates, I'm sure Shirish will know, at my time was about 55%. I don't know what the numbers are at this point of time. This is 5 years ago. So you go back and you look at the numbers and you say, this guy's got done everything right. Why is he not putting his why is it not going through? So what we did was that we picked up the phone, as Hitarth said, and spoke to a bunch of people. So this is when the penny drops. So I spoke to this guy in MP. So I said, sir, आपने सब कुछ कर दिया है. आपके पास डेबिट कार्ड है, आपने सब कुछ कर दिया है. फिर आपने, why did you drop off? In my tuta-futa Hindi, I asked him. So he said, sir, पर मेरे पास तो डेबिट कार्ड नहीं है. So then I said, sir, so I told him, so I told him, है आपके पास? He says, नहीं. So then I said, आपका बैंक कौन सा है? So he said, SBI. So आपके पास कार्ड है? हाँ, मेरा ATM कार्ड है. So that is when immediately overnight we changed all our communication from debit card to ATM card, and our success rate went from 55% to close to 60%. And then now it's been copied across by the industry. This was at that time. So Amazon was the first one to change debit card across. So Jio was the first to do it, and then Amazon did it. So the debit card got renamed as ATM card. Because in Bharat, as everyone is fond of saying, debit card doesn't hold value.
Yeah, that's insight, I guess. Great. If there's any questions from people on the table? Okay. So I guess, great. Thanks, guys. On behalf of CleverTap, would like to take this occasion to thank you for your time and all the insights. And I'm sure it'll make for a great ebook sometime down the line. And thanks to my colleagues for being here and arranging this. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Request a group photo if possible, Jasmeet.